Laptops, Part 2. In this nugget, we'll be taking a look at laptops. This will be Part 2, where we'll start off by talking about networking, such as infrared, Bluetooth, wired, wireless. So we'll address some of those items. Now, as far as networking proper goes, we have a section on that on its own, but I did want to address this in terms of laptops because of the various ways you can connect. And then the laptop LCD. You might have problems with the laptop LCD. You might want to use an external monitor. You might want to use a projector. So we'll take a look at some of those characteristics as well as the components that are important to an LCD. And then when it comes to those external monitors or projectors, we'll look at how to enable those and connect to them. And then we'll take a look at troubleshooting laptops as well. Let's talk here about networking and the various kinds of networking or communications devices that you might use with a laptop. Okay, first one here, and I think we talked about this in the past, is infrared. That's mostly obsolete. It's kind of inconvenient. It's a little bit sketchy. It doesn't always work very reliably, and it requires a line of sight. But you may have someone bring an older laptop to you that still has that. Hopefully, they will abandon that in favor of other methods such as Bluetooth. And you know what? Even if it's an older laptop, it probably still has a USB connection on it, and you can get USB Bluetooth adapters. So you can just plug in a Bluetooth adapter into a USB port, and they can then potentially abandon infrared. Because see, the Bluetooth is going to be useful for doing things such as file transfers where they might not have otherwise have a network connection and things of this nature. And then a lot of the laptops nowadays also have Bluetooth built into them anyway. And here, even though I'm using Windows 7, which is not part of the A+ exam objectives, I did just want to go ahead and show you how to do this, because it's really going to be the same whether you're using Windows 7 or Windows Vista anyhow. But what I want to do is I'm going to the control panel here to devices. This is the same place where you'll, for example, add a printer. And let me shrink this window a little bit. And then what I want to do is to add a device. When I do that, it'll start to scan it. You can see here that this particular computer has a Bluetooth adapter in it. Remember I just told you that you can take a Bluetooth adapter and plug it into a USB port? Well, my desktop computer didn't have Bluetooth support, so I plugged one of those adapters in to the USB port. Found a headset. I don't even know whose that is. That's not one of mine. It's probably my neighbor's or something. I could probably, transfer files to their headset or something, or, do something like what they did on that old science fiction movie, Scanners. Transmit something to his headset that, I don't know, makes his head explode. Anyway, there's the phone that I've got. This is my Aris phone. It's one of the newer Droid phones. Oops, I just better turn it back on again here. Make it discoverable again. It times out after a while, and I was jabbering on, so it lost the connection. So anyway, I can make that available here. And there it is. It'll show up here again as Aris here in just a moment. Once I've found that, I can then transfer items to it or from it. Okay, like files. For example, maybe there's photographs that I want to be able to use on this Aris that I don't have. So here, I probably shouldn't be showing this on the screen, but hey, whatever. So 4, 5, 2, 8. And I'm having to do this fast without talking, really. 0, 2, 8, 1. I'm typing that into my phone, and the reason why I'm doing that is because you have to type that into the phone to successfully pair it. It's kind of like entering in a rudimentary security level so that just a passerby does not pair with my phone. It generates a random number, and then I have to type it in. You may also decide to use a cellular WAN device, and this is simply a cell phone connection to your laptop that allows you to use the internet in most cases. This would be something from Verizon, from AT&T, from Sprint, some company like that, or whoever your carrier is. Normally they plug in through the USB port, although they may also be some flavor of a PC card device as well. But they will just get you onto your carrier's network, and you'll have somewhat broadband connections, although that can be spotty depending upon where you are. For my broadband connection, I usually get at least a megabit per second, sometimes 2. Then you may also have a modem that you make a connection with here as well. This is going to use plain old telephone service, or POTS, as we often call that as well. It's a 4-wire connection. Actually, only 2 of the wires are usually used to send and receive. And then what will happen here is it just uses the slow landlines to send and receive that data, usually less than 56K per second. Also, you may have an Ethernet connection to your laptop, and that's going to be very common, actually. And almost any new laptop will have an Ethernet port in it. So just plug it in and away you go. Then there's also a wireless LAN. This very often is going to be integrated into the laptop, and very often the antenna is kind of threaded up through the monitor or the outside bevel edge of the monitor, and that way it gives it a big wide area to scan for or to receive signals. Now, before I conclude this section on networking, I want to make a big emphasis right here for the wireless LAN connection. I wouldn't be surprised if this were a very important A+ exam objective. And this is the scenario. You have a user who says that they brought their laptop into the office. They're not very far from a wireless access point. They've been on the wireless network before, but gee, they can't seem to connect today. You've checked the wireless access point. Everything should be working fine. Other people are connected just fine. Why can't this user? Is it because they're your problem child or something like this? Well, very often, and this is the case even with IT professionals, sometimes we forget this, they may not have enabled or conversely disabled the switch on the laptop. Most laptops will have a small slider switch that toggles on or off for the wireless local area network wireless network adapter. And so that has to be, of course, enabled in order for them to get onto the network. Conversely, you may want to disable it in certain other situations where, for example, you're in a public area where you don't want to connect to the wireless network. Maybe you want to use your wireless carrier's cellular WAN instead. That's very often what I'll do, simply because it's more secure. But the point I'm trying to make here is, very often people will say they can't connect. Well, that's because their wireless LAN switch on the laptop is disabled. Oh, and then before I move on, there is one other thing to mention about the wireless network connections. And this is, again, something that might be important to you. If the wireless card appears in Device Manager, however, they cannot seem to connect to the wireless networks, then it could be that the internal antenna that connects the wireless network card is somehow jarred loose or has never been properly connected or something like that. Because remember, the wireless network card inside of the laptop, it might be a PCI. It might be one of those mini PCI connectors that has wires coming off of it like we saw in our last nugget. If it's never properly been connected to the antenna, that could cause a problem. And of course, Device Manager will still see the device, but if it's not connected to an antenna, then it's not going to be able to communicate on the network. Now let's move on to something that is a big focus in terms of the A+ exam objectives. This is something I would be very well aware of, and that would be the various characteristics and troubleshooting scenarios that could occur with laptop LCDs. First of all, you have to understand what the various components are, and this is kind of a short list. There's more than just this, but these are the key players in it. One of those would be the video connector. There's a number of different kinds of connectors that you will look at here in a moment. Another thing to look at there is the LCD inverter. You see, the LCD actually has a separate power or an independent power that powers that backlight. Now let's look at laptop LCDs. This is something that I think is going to have a big emphasis in those A+ exam objectives, and so I would be very well aware of everything I'm talking about here with laptop LCDs. One of the things you'll want to take a look at here are, first of all, just the various components of a laptop LCD. The video connectors, which we'll look at again here in a moment. The LCD inverter. This is really basically power to the LCD. Okay, but it has its own inverter that's used for that. And in a close association with that is the LCD backlight, which takes also quite a lot of power and is a big drain potentially on the battery. The LCD backlight is what actually adjusts the brightness of the screen. So very often you'll have a function key on a laptop, as I mentioned in our last nugget, and then you'll have some combination of key that you'll press, function plus, I don't know, F5 or F4, something like that, or a couple of other keys that you'll use to increase or decrease the brightness, and all that's really doing is changing the power that's going to the backlight. So that's what that really is all about. Now, the connectors that you can use with the laptop LCD, there's a couple of main ones there. One of those would be a VGA connector, or the other one would be an S-video connector. We looked at those early in our series here. These are analog connectors, so they're suitable, and you're not going to really lose out on an awful lot by using these, but digital is almost always better under any circumstance. So with a digital, if you want to use a digital connection, and this would be for an external connection, by the way, an external VGA, external S-video, external DVI monitor, or an external HDMI monitor or device, then that would, of course, be digital. The highest quality that you can get of all of those would be HDMI. And by the way, as I mentioned early in our series, that carries both sound and video as well. And now, the other thing to keep in mind, and this is somewhat of a tangent, it's not really laptop specific, although it can be laptops or desktops, and that is if you want to watch TV on your computer. I will confess I may have done that a time or two myself. But if you want to watch TV on your computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, you need to be able to convert NTSC or PAL signals. And in order to do that, you have to use a TV tuner. Okay, so just bear that in mind. You want to watch TV, you need a TV tuner to convert NTSC or PAL, depending on where you live, to get two different kinds of signals. Then you'll be able to watch television using a TV tuner. Let's also address some alternate ways to use monitors. One of those ways would be use the dual view method. This is where you actually have two monitors. Actually, this is sometimes even called two-headed configuration. What I would do is I would have the LCD on my laptop, up and operating just fine, and then I could use any of the video outs, whether it's an S-video, a VGA, or an HDMI, or whatever one I wanted, and I could output that to a monitor or even a television screen. Okay. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, maybe the screen on my laptop's too small, so I could get a larger, higher resolution display on my external monitor. That's very similar to what I would want with maybe a docking station. But whereas I would just want to not just replace the display that appears on my laptop with an external monitor, I might actually want to use both at once. That's where we get this dual view two-headed thing, where I'm using them both at once. With that, I could get a mirrored display, for example. A good example of that, by the way, is a wedding I photographed not too long ago. When the photographs were finished, I went to the bride and groom. I brought my laptop and an LCD monitor, and I turned the monitor towards them. I plugged it into the VGA port on my laptop so that I could see the exact same thing that they were seeing. Okay, so I mirrored the display so that as they sat across the table from me, they were able to see everything that I was showing them in terms of all the photographs. You can also use it to extend the desktop. And then by way of example there, I just took a photograph of my own desktop just a few moments ago. And this is actually a desktop computer with two monitors on it. Okay, but I could do the same thing with a laptop. So for example, over here, this might be my laptop LCD. And this might be my external monitor over here. Okay, so you can pretty much do the same thing. Now, your laptop LCD might be a different size than the external one, so it's not as pretty in terms of the symmetry that we see here. But otherwise, it pretty much works the same other than that. By the way, this is a photograph of the Grand Tetons from Grand Tetons National Park in western Wyoming. I took that back this past October. A beautiful park, probably one of my favorite places in the world to go. Anyway, so we can use that to extend the desktop. Now, one thing to keep in mind there is that when you're using this with a laptop, you got to keep in mind that function key, because you may need to enable and or disable, I don't know what happened to my screen here, and or disable the ability to be able to see that monitor. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make with this is you might not get anything on that external display until you use the function key along with one of the F keys to be able to turn it on, because the laptop may not automatically see that external monitor is connected. Now, some laptops I've worked with automatically detect that and automatically enable it, but other ones you have to use the function key to be able to turn them on. Also, there may be some vendor software. For example, with my Lenovo, anytime it detects an external display, it pops up it's not really a window, but it pops up a message asking me whether I want to use a mirrored display, whether I want to use an extended desktop, that sort of thing. It can also even detect whether or not it's a projector or not. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and I would bear this in mind as well, is that if you connect to an CRT as opposed to an LCD, then you might need to also adjust the refresh rate for that video out so that it's greater than, actually that should be a greater than symbol there, greater than 60 hertz on the refresh rate. Because otherwise it's going to flicker and it's going to probably cause a little bit of an annoyance there. You see, LCDs don't have a flickering refresh rate the same way that CRTs do, and as such, most LCDs only have a 60 hertz because it doesn't really matter. But if you put 60 hertz on a CRT, it's going to flicker. Also, with projectors. Now, you will treat these almost entirely the same way that you would with an external monitor. The only difference is they're going to sometimes have a different resolution. Very often for speakers or presenters like I am when I'm speaking at Tech Mentor, I will use them in a mirrored configuration because I want to see on my laptop the same thing that the audience is seeing on the screen over my left shoulder. Now, I've mentioned before that we'll have a section on troubleshooting, but I do have a special section on troubleshooting just laptops here in this particular nugget because it has quite a few problems of its own that could occur that are unique to laptops. First thing is the display. Now, since we just finished discussing that, let's continue on troubleshooting the display. First of all, if you have any kind of troubles with the display, one thing you might consider is to connect an external monitor. Why? You want to confirm the video card, basically. If the video card is good, then it will still show a valid image on the external display. If the video card is bad, it will not show on the external display or on a projector or on the LCD screen of the laptop itself. Okay, and so then you would know that there's a problem with the video card, for example. Otherwise, if it does show on the external, then there's something wrong with the LCD of the laptop. Also, if you see faint ghost-like outlines on the LCD of the laptop, then it might just be time to replace that LCD screen. Or if it appears to be just very dim. I mean, it appears. You might be able to open up a document on it and see just very faintly that document, for example. But if it's just very dim, check out the function key brightness because that will adjust the backlight strength of that LCD monitor. And if you kick it up, you might be able to see it better. It could be also that it was simply in a very, very low power state or the user has configured a low power setting for that monitor. Also, if you do hook up an external monitor and it does seem to work, even though the display is very dim on the actual laptop, and it's not a matter of the function brightness, it's not an issue of the power settings or whatever, you've got everything set up properly. But if it's still dim, but the external works, then it's probably the inverter, and it's not properly powering that LCD. You may also run into situations where as you move the lid or maybe move it back and forth on its hinges, you may see varying shades of red, green, or blue in the color shift. It might just kind of switch or alternate between those. If that takes place when you're moving the lid, very often that's going to be a bad LCD cable, or it's loose, or coming disconnected, or it could be that it's been serviced recently, and when they reconnected the lid section of that LCD panel, they may have pinched that cable. So if it's a pinched LCD cable, then of course all of those things will be revealed, will cause that problem when you move the lid back and forth. That's going to give you that color shift. Also, if the lid is open but you can't see anything, check the LCD cutoff switch as well. Because you see, most laptops will have a cutoff switch. Actually, I just opened this photograph, so let me show it to you. On this one, when I close the lid, it depresses this little peg right here. That's the LCD cutoff switch, which does a couple things. It turns off the LCD monitor because there's no sense in having it turned on with the lids closed. You can't see it anyway. So no sense in having it drain power. And also, it can be used to notify the operating system that it needs to go to sleep or needs to go into hibernate, depending upon whatever power configuration settings you've set up. So if the lid is open but there's no image, it could be that this LCD cutoff switch is stuck down. There might have been some debris or something. Maybe somebody was eating a candy bar around it and some chocolate got down in there. Who knows, whatever else. And it could be stuck down or something like that. You might need to clean it out or otherwise replace it. Now this is very fancy artwork that I've created here. This would be an example of a display on a tablet PC. And of course, the whole interface for a tablet PC is the LCD monitor. Okay, the whole thing is the monitor. What you do is when you want to access something, like this is the start menu. Ooh, that's pretty ugly. If this is the start menu down here at the bottom, then in order to do anything with this, I don't have a mouse, so I tap my finger on this instead, and it should pop up the menu and I'll be able to see my various options, for example. Now the thing is, sometimes users will complain that they put their finger right here and yet it seems to activate whatever was right here. Maybe they had a program open and it opened up Microsoft Word or something like that, or whatever version of an application that they're using on this tablet PC. So it doesn't seem to be very accurate. Here's the key thing about troubleshooting these things. Normally when you first buy them and power them on, it should identify that you need to calibrate the touch screen. And it will say, it'll put an X up here, for example. It'll say touch this, and then it'll put an X up here and it'll say touch that. And then all the different corners, and then maybe in the middle, and different places. And it does that to vector where the user is going to touch things and how they touch things. If this has gotten out of calibration, whether it's because the tablet PC became a hand-me-down and it went to somebody else who touches the monitor slightly differently, or sometimes they just get out of calibration and you have to recalibrate them, then they're going to get some things that are skewed if it's not calibrated. So just make sure that it's calibrated properly. If you go through the menu system, maybe in the control panel, then there will be an option there. It could be from the vendor or it could be a Windows thing where you will have an option to recalibrate the touch screen. Also in troubleshooting, you may have trouble with temperature. So for example, if you're using the laptop and you hear a steady beeping noise, that sometimes is a warning signal that the laptop is overheating. So it kind of sounds like a BIOS type of a beeping sound. Also, the laptop may just suddenly shut down without any kind of warning whatsoever. You may lose any documents that you had not saved, and it could potentially corrupt the operating system. So you don't want that to happen. What could be taking place there is there may be some airflow blockage or the fan might be bad. When it comes to that, let me go ahead and open up another photograph that I took actually just last night, because I kind of destroyed a laptop that I was discarding anyway, so I kind of totally opened it up, mostly because my son and I were curious and we wanted to kind of fiddle around with it, and I was kind of educating him with some things about computers. Poor kid. He's got a nerd for a father. Anyway, I should be teaching him to play baseball or football or something, but instead I'm teaching him about computers. This here is the heat sink that goes over the top of your processor. Okay, and what happens with this is this heatsink, which you can see has some copper elements in it, and these fins here, goes over the top of this, and there's a fan there that we saw as well. And let me go back to that. There's a fan kind of here in the background you can see spins around. This is quite dusty, isn't it? Well, this whole thing might need to be blown out, and you might need to disassemble part of this so you can access it and clean it out. And because you're certainly, if you're having an airflow blockage or the fan is bad, then you're not going to be able to get proper cooling to it. Now, when it comes to airflow blockage, let me go back to this thing. This is normally on the outside edge. In this particular laptop, it's the left side of the laptop towards the back, towards the hinge of the LCD monitor. You know, if a user is working in bed, a lot of people watch TV, or maybe it's they got blankets covering this whole thing up here, and airflow is not properly flowing through here, or it's being blocked, then that could certainly cause a problem. If the fan is bad, this may be something that cannot be replaced on its own. You might have to replace the entire heatsink. But you can see on this one, it's kind of a little bit out of focus. You can see there's screws there, so this one might be one that I could remove and potentially replace as well. If I have to remove the whole heatsink, though, when you go back to the CPU, just remember that you have to use the same standard practice to install the CPU here and to properly cool it that you would with a desktop. In other words, there was thermal paste on top of this. Well, I would want to clean the excess old thermal paste off. You can use isopropyl alcohol in order to be able to do that. But I could clean that off and then put some more thermal paste on, reinstall the heatsink or add a new heatsink, and then hopefully we'd be back in business. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, if you do have to replace the keyboard, and I've done that more than a couple of times, then do keep these safety measures in mind. Number one, unplug the AC, not the air conditioner. Unplug the power, okay? And this is not really necessarily only a safety thing. Generally speaking, you're going to be safe in terms of not damaging the laptop. That's what I mean by safety here. Because you could accidentally touch something that's electrically charged and create a problem, or you could contribute to static problems as well. So unplug the AC, remove the battery, do all of that before you start to disassemble the case. And the reason why I say that you have to unplug all the power is because a lot of times you'll have to remove a lot of these screws and expose sensitive parts of the laptop that would not normally be visible. Also, sticky keys. What's that mean? Well, does that mean someone poured a Coke over their laptop? Probably. That does happen from time to time. However, you may also see another situation in which a user with certain disabilities is going to need some help. And for that, you can go to the control panel in ease of access. And if it's somebody that is not able to properly press all of the keyboard keys, then you can change how that works. So if we change how our keyboard works, you can turn on what we call sticky keys. This is very useful because if someone is, for example, a paraplegic and they only have use of their mouth, for example, they may have a stylus that they use to depress the keys, but it's hard for them to be very precise. And they may press a key and accidentally hold it down too long so that it starts to repeat. So with sticky keys, what happens is they don't have to also press simultaneous keys all at once. So for example, if they're only using a single stylus, they can only press Control or Alt or Delete, but they can't press all three at once. Well, with the sticky keys turned on, it would allow them to press each one of these individually, and then the operating system would interpret that as having them all held down together. There's also this item right here as well. That would be turn on the toggle keys. That would allow the user to hear a tone anytime they press any of these lock keys that you can see through here as well. And that just helps the user to know that they've done that, because otherwise they might be unaware. So toggle keys, sticky keys are very useful for that sort of thing. And then you can also turn on filter keys. This will be useful, again, if they're pressing down on the keyboard but they're not able to release it soon enough and it starts to repeat a little bit, kind of spasmodically and out of control. And then finally, let's talk about some general practices of troubleshooting your laptops. First of all, and this does not apply only to laptops, but it can also apply to desktops. That is that you generally want to disconnect and or disable any unrelated devices to whatever it is that you're having a trouble with. So for example, if I've got 4 USB devices plugged into my USB ports, but I'm only having trouble with maybe my USB connected Wi-Fi device, well, I would probably want to unplug everything else and leave only that device plugged in so that something else would not potentially interfere with any of the testing or analysis that I was doing. Kind of helps you to just think a little bit straighter when you don't have other things that are interfering with the potential test results that you're going to produce. Also, parts management. Boy, this is a big one, especially with laptops. So many of those screws are so tiny, they're almost invisible, and you really may have difficulty keeping them organized and remembering where they went. So, when possible, you might want to label them. That doesn't mean that you put a piece of tape on the screws. They're too small, really, for that. But you might want to have certain things that you can get from Home Depot or Lowe's, little trays that have certain size compartments. And you can put certain size screws in one compartment, another size screw in another compartment. Just keep everything separated, because a lot of these laptop screws are very, very close in size, and some of them are only marginally different. And yet, it's important that you don't take a screw that's too long and put it into a screw hole and tighten it down, because it may come into contact, for example, with the motherboard in a place where it's not supposed to. It might touch a chip or something like that, and then you've probably ruined a system. So you got to really keep those straight, and it can be a little bit baffling sometimes, but make sure you keep all the screws separated from one another and that you remember where they went. Also, sometimes that's going to be difficult to remember where they went, because you might have a couple of dozen screws laying around and, geez, who knows where they went. Well, you may also want to get a vendor service manual. This is not the owner's manual, which tells the user, how to turn on the computer and how to do a bunch of rudimentary things. This is going to possibly have exploded diagrams where it will have the exact screw that's supposed to be used in different screw holes and so forth. And you're probably not going to be able to get that on a consumer level, but if you're an A+ technician and you're working for a shop, you probably can contact the laptop manufacturer and get a vendor service manual, at least a PDF of it. Now, the final thing, and another thing that I've been able to use to great extent, is something I mentioned in a previous nugget, and then I just use the camera on my cell phone. And if I know that I'm about to disassemble something that looks like it could be a real mess to put back together, I'll take a picture of it. It may not be very high resolution, but at least it'll give me the general idea there. Okay. Also, again, there are some things that are replaceable. Now, these are not technically FRUs because they're not that easy to replace. A field replaceable unit is something that's usually fairly simple to replace, but these are still possible to replace for an A+ technician, most of these anyway. The keyboard, okay, we talked about that already. The CPU and or the heatsink. Now, this can be quite involved in taking off enough parts to be able to get to these things. Some things just will not allow it, or they'll void the warranty. In fact, if a laptop's under warranty, I usually don't like to work on it anyway, unless it's replacing something like just a PC card or something simple like that. If it requires me to turn one screw, I normally will send it into the manufacturer, because I wouldn't want to void the warranty if I'm not a factory authorized technician for their particular brand. But those things are replaceable, all these things. Also, a lot of the plastics are replaceable as well. It might be a cracked bezel of some type that goes around the LCD screen, for example. A lot of times you can get replacements from the manufacturer. They kind of make me nervous because a lot of those, they just snap on. And so in order to take them off, you don't unscrew anything. You have to just very carefully pry your way around and just be very delicate with it. And in taking it off, you might actually break something else. So I don't really have any other advice other than just to be very careful with that one. There's also pointers that can be replaced. For example, your touchpad can be replaced. Your pointing stick can be replaced. If there's a fan inside of it, no, there should be, the heatsink that is, you might be able to replace the fan separately. You can also replace the motherboard. That is definitely a factory-trained technician that should be doing that. There's also a CMOS battery that you can replace on your own as well. I think maybe you remember this when I was looking earlier. Let me try to crack this open and find it. There it goes. I'm going to open up another photograph here so that we can take a look at this. When we were looking at here it is. That's the wrong photograph. Let me try another one, folks. When we were looking at the mini PCI card, one of the things that we saw there was that there's actually a laptop battery that appears right next to it. There it is. Sorry that took so long, but anyway, there it is. There's a coin battery. You see, the laptops also have to have a battery that charges the CMOS. Otherwise, you're going to lose the settings, and it's going to reset the date back to, I don't know, 1981 or something like that. But that can be replaced as well, and usually that's going to be behind a fairly obvious door. You don't have to unscrew a lot of stuff to get to it. The speakers can potentially also be replaced, but again, those are very often integrated in such a way into the casing of the laptop that very often I'll just send that one in as well. Now finally, if you do have to ship that device, and I kind of got crammed for space down here, sorry about that. If you do have to ship this to the vendor, one thing you've got to be careful of is that you make sure that all PC cards or any other kinds of peripherals that can be taken off are taken off. Because if this is my laptop right here, and it's a closed laptop, but I've got a PC card sticking out of here, then very often that'll get jarred or bumped in shipment, or something will hit it, or whatever, and it could entirely ruin the entire slot on the inside of the laptop. So always remove any of those kinds of protrusions like PC cards before you ship them out. In this nugget, we took a look at laptops. This was part 2, where we started off by talking about networking. And although you can network, of course, desktop computers as well, some of the things related to laptops are more unique to laptops, such as Bluetooth and infrared, and also wireless. Even though you can use wireless on desktop computers, they're very common on laptop computers. We also took a look at the laptop LCD, the various components of it, the things that are important to a laptop LCD to make it operate properly. And we also took a look at what if you wanted to connect external displays, such as a bigger monitor or a projector, for example. And then we also concluded here with the discussion of troubleshooting, because laptops have kind of their own unique characteristics and potentially their own problems, so we address that independently here. And again, later on in our Nugget series, we'll have another section on troubleshooting in general. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.